Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for Move Church Online. We just welcome each and every one of you. So glad that you are with us today, whether you are a part of our church family or you are joining us for the first time. We just say welcome. We love you and we care for you so much. You know, today is week 13 that we have been being forced to meet online only, not in person. And honestly, I am not getting used to it. I miss being able to see you face to face. And, I can't hardly wait for us to honestly get back together. And actually, we're working on a plan, and we're going to be communicating very soon to you what that plan is for our reopening. But obviously it's changing, almost like week to week. And so we just wanted to keep you informed on that. Speaking of change, this past week and a half has been a very difficult season in our nation. And so we are doing something a little different today. And I have invited two of my brothers to come and join us. And we're gonna just sit and have a conversation today as we look, and not only have we in the middle of trying to deal with this pandemic of the coronavirus and the heightened tensions that it has caused. Now over the past couple of weeks, we've been forced to deal face to face once again with the racial injustice that continues to happen inside our country. 2 weeks ago tomorrow, once again, an unarmed black man was brutally killed, murdered right before our eyes. We all saw it on video. A police officer put his knee into the neck of George Floyd and took his life. And, every time this happens, it seems to me, whether it's George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Tatiana Jefferson, every time it happens, it just continues to seem that it almost pulls a scab off of a wound that will never heal. And we're forced, and we look at what's happening, and honestly, it's understandable as we see the unrest and the bitterness and the hatred and the anger. Because I think, honestly, we're all angry, right? We're all angry. I'm angry. You're angry. I think God is angry. It's disgraceful. In fact, it's disgraceful to even think that inside America that we're still dealing with the fact that racism, prejudice, bigotry, it still exists. It's still something that we're dealing with. It's disgraceful. And so I think that we all, as we think about it, we look and we say, what can we do? And I know as a pastor, that's been my question. What do we do? Do we continue to allow this to happen and then just hoping that it's going to go away and not happen again? What do we do in the meantime? And so that's why we are doing something a little different. And I've invited Clint Cleveland and Andre Taylor, two of my brothers, to come. And we wanted to do something just to create an opportunity for a conversation. Proverbs 31 says that we should speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. And I want you to think about that verse, because when you think about that, God said we need to speak up for those that are poor, for those that are helpless. Think about that verse, for those that are experiencing racially injustice. And so that's what we're going to attempt to do today. And I pray that you will just stay with us for the next few moments. Listen, as a white pastor of a multicultural church, it seems like every time this happens, there's questions in our mind. What can we do? What needs to be done? And so I just want to make it clear as we get started here today that we're probably, and I don't know guys how you feel, but we're probably not going to say everything that's going to be pleasing to everybody, right? we're trying to engage in a conversation that needs to happen in order for change to take place. And so if we say the wrong thing, I pray that you do not just tune us out. Stay with us, because what we're actually trying to do is start a conversation so that we can engage with one another, so that we can internally. And I think that it's interesting that we're being forced to deal with this once again while we are all confined in our homes. And I think, if you think about that, it's very important for us to understand, what can we do? Like, while we're in our homes, how can we have these conversations with our children? What can we do, right, to address this issue? And so I just want to dive in, and I would like to just start by giving you an opportunity, guys, to, Andre, I'll start with you. What's your thoughts about the events that's happened over the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, first, let me start by just thanking you for opening up, the conversation to what is needed in our church, in our communities, and ultimately in our world. So it takes courage to be able to step forward in a situation such as this, and to kind of put yourself in a position to be exposed, to have conversations that we pray kind of lead to effective conclusions. So I'm really thankful for you having the heart to really want to have a conversation that can seem in so many ways awkward for a lot of us, if we face the truth about it. But it takes, I think, to have a willingness, which you have in this moment, to be able to really want to bring people together, such as myself and Clint and others, to be able to discuss what the issue is in terms of kind of the race relations. So I want to thank you for it, Pastor. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate it. For me, like so many, watching, yet again, another black life being taken unjustly was saddening. It was frustrating. But I think the feeling that I experienced the most, which will seem awkward when I say it, but it was almost a numbness. Because I've seen this situation play out far too often.
Right.
And whenever you're experiencing something over and over again, well, what happens, it becomes a normal aspect of your life, and it takes a little bit of the emotion away that you might have had the first time you experienced it.
Sure.
And that's not to lessen the significance of George Floyd's life, because his life was just as valuable as any other's life that's been taken in a way such as that.
Right.
But it is to speak to the work that has yet to be done in this country, and that needs to be done ultimately amongst ourselves and in our communities, to make sure that these things don't happen this often.
Absolutely.
Because I shouldn't have the feeling of being numb to seeing one of my brothers, on their face dying on the concrete.
Absolutely.
But when you have something like that take place, as I said again, over and over again, there is a level of, wow, I've seen this happen before. And I'm not sure if I can even believe that we're going to be able to overcome an issue that seems so systemic in our society. And are there people out there who are willing to take the necessary steps to be able to kill this issue where it stands?
Yeah.
And so when I saw it, I was completely taken back. I have kids that are getting older, right? And so they're now starting to become conscious and aware of the world around them. And so my son, he's 8 years old, already knows George Floyd's name, already has seen the vicious and egregious way in which his life was taken, and is saying, Dad, I got questions about that.
Absolutely.
Race wasn't something that was necessarily on the priority list for him in terms of learning his ABCs and being able to count and being able to read. But now it's being something that's being put right in the forefront as an 8-year-old to be able to digest this and to learn this. And my prayer is that God will give me the ability to teach my son the truth about race.
Right.
And at the same time, for him to be able to love who he is, and then also to be able to share that love with everyone in their unique ways and the things that make them different. So I have to say that for me, I was totally taken back. I was hurt, I was saddened, and almost felt hopeless. But I think what hit me the most is like I'm starting to feel numb to all of these black lives as they're being taken.
Right.
It seems almost without any care, for that. So that's
Right.
kind of where I was.
Right.
Absolutely.
What about you, Clint?
Yeah, and I'd like to just echo what Andre said. Thank you again, Pastor, for this opportunity. I really appreciate, and I am very appreciative of this opportunity, because I think change begins in settings such as this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I'm often reminded of Jesus in the scriptures. Many of the lives that he transformed, the hearts that he changed, it began with a conversation.
Right.
And that's exactly what you've given us an opportunity to do today. And so I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for that. And I would just answer that question in terms of my initial response to viewing and hearing. I'm not really a technology guy. I don't follow a lot of social media, but my wife said, you have to watch this. You have to watch this. And so I knew then it was something pretty severe, because she knows I don't like to follow a lot of that, because a lot of it is negative.
Yeah.
And I try to stay away from
Absolutely.
negativity. But this was something that she was absolutely right about. And I'm still trying to figure out, how do I tell this story? How do I tell the backdrop to this, the history behind a lot of this to my children, to your point? And that's the thing I think that stuck with me initially, is that this is a man that was a father.
Yeah.
I'm a father.
Right.
This is a man who, like many of us, okay, he's made mistakes. I know I certainly have made mistakes. So I could, identify with him more than just on the color aspect. He's a man of color. I'm a man of color. But as a father, like, what about his daughter?
Yeah.
What about his family? What about all the other lives?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, my initial reaction was, this has got to stop. Mm-hmm. This cannot continue. What do we do to affect change? And I think, again, it begins with each one of us, individually. And then we come together collectively to have the conversation. We can't ignore this anymore. That's not helping. We can't avoid it. It's happening right before us.
Absolutely.
We've got generations coming behind us.
Yeah.
We got to be able to bridge this gap, if you will. And so I would say that my initial reaction was one of disgust. But again, I'm not discouraged. In fact, I'm even more encouraged, because we are having these conversations.
Yes. Amen. It was a human being. Amen. And to see what that happened to a human being was despicable. It was appalling. And to your point, it almost makes you want to feel hopeless, And in fact, that's been a part, man, it's just hopeless. Like, this is never going to change. That's been a part of conversations that we've had during this whole, when is this going to change, right? And I think you got to wonder, and you got to ask, like, why does it take a human being being killed for us to have this conversation, right? To correct it and to start bringing some clarity to it. Why does this keep happening?
Black people, like any other ethnicity or group of people on the face of the earth, are not homogenous. We don't all think the same. Right. We don't have the same opinions. We don't all eat at the same restaurants and dance to the same music. The beauty in our culture, just like any other culture, is that we have unique and different opinions that are individual to ourselves and to our families. And there's beauty in that, But what you're saying, I kind of thought about that earlier today on my way over here. Why does it take death to move the pendulum to a place where we need to act?
Absolutely.
When in reality, we should be able to act based on someone's voice being echoed throughout their community, throughout their neighborhood, throughout their world, that something wrong is happening. Yeah. But I think that the fact that we're saying that death needed to happen in order for us to move speaks to the very deep roots of racism that still exist in a very mighty way in our country today. Mm-hmm. That in order for us to even have a conversation to where we think we need to rethink how we're putting together legislation, or how we're developing your communities, or whether or not your claim is valid, we need to see people die in vicious and egregious ways to be moved enough to be able to think that there's a reason to even fight for your cause. Yeah. So the black plight is no different than any other person's plight who's experienced any levels of persecution in the world. And so if we're all able to collectively agree that what took place a week or so ago should never have happened, then everyone should be immediately ignited by a level of boldness that pushes them to say that I'm going to fight this issue of racism as if it was something that was trying to attack my own children. Because I believe that when something is getting ready to attack your children, I think all of us would have a united response in terms of what we would do to defend our kids. Right. And so it doesn't matter if you're black or if you're white, because this isn't really a black issue. It's a human issue. It's a human issue. If you don't look at that man who's on the ground with a knee in his neck by somebody who was entrusted to uphold and to serve their community, and his life was taken for something that was very minor, and think that that's not a problem, then that itself is a part
Is a
of the
part of
issue.
the issue.
We need to do
Yeah.
the work to work in a person's heart who believes that.
That's right.
Because the issue is not exclusive to the black community.
Yeah.
This issue really relates to every human being. I
Yeah.
should never see something like that and not be impacted to do something differently
Absolutely.
almost immediately.
Absolutely.
Or come to the support or to the aid of my brother who's dying in the street in that way.
Amen.
That's right.
Amen.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think to some extent, and this was spoken to earlier, there's a numbness. There's in the media, there's a need to show things with a certain lens, a certain light. And so I think it kind of drives us one way or another, whichever side of that pendulum you want to find yourself on, but to a point where it's just another killing. It's just another person's life. I mean, it's every day,
Yeah.
depending on which news channel you turn on.
Yeah.
Someone's dying. But I think what we're really missing, which is these are lives, right? Man didn't create life. Life comes from God. So
Right.
who is man to take life? And so I think we're missing the actual value behind all of our existence.
Yeah.
I mean, we all are created with a purpose. We're created to be driven. And so to rob ourselves to that numbness to where it's just, that's
Yeah.
the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what I want to, change, at least for the children, the
Yeah.
next generation come up. I don't want that to be the response. Oh, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
No, that's not just how it is. And so I think that attributes to some of this.
And I'll go a little bit further. And to your question, I'll pose another question. When you ask, how did we get here? Well, how badly do you want to know the answers? And that's
Yeah.
not just to you, but that's to the world.
That's right.
Right.
Because I think only recently have we begun to recognize the very vicious history that we've all become accustomed to be aware of recently.
Right.
Do you want to know the truth about the institutions of this country and how they were established?
Right.
Because there were people that came before us that did not see you and I being able to sit in a room like this right now and have an actual articulate
That's the
conversation.
truth.
Because they didn't believe that it was possible for me
Right.
to speak in this way to a man such as your stature.
Right.
So I think we need to look at the history of this country to really to investigate, like I said, the institutions, the communities, the mentality that men who are considered to be forefathers of this country created a divide between us and you based on our skin color so that they can enjoy luxuries that we would not be afforded. So if you really want to know, how we get here, I think it's a historical perspective that you've got to take to be able to come underneath the truth of why I still sit here with people who might be different from me and I'm perceived as someone who's less than.
Wow.
And so if people are really willing to get to that answer, I would pray that they would want the answer to that. And I would also pray that they would be able to embrace this vicious history and do something now to change the cycle.
Amen.
Because I don't hold you responsible, Pastor Mark, because you're a white man, for my experience of racism in the country.
That's right.
Because I know that you're not racist.
Right.
But what I do know is that there is a history of men who came before you who were. And they did everything in their power to create laws to prevent me from having an opportunity to reach a status of success in this world.
Wow.
But it's people like you who are going to be able to move it further if you come alongside me and say, I will make sure every single time that I have breath that there will be another person that will experience that type of racism as long
wow.
as they're in my presence.
Wow, wow, wow.
So I believe that that's how we got here, by not addressing a history, not owning that history, and then that puts us in a position to recognize, you know what, maybe everything that we're experiencing now wasn't done right. And now we need to fix that in a very deep way.
Wow.
And that takes people having to question kind of where they sit right now and the things that they're able to be afforded.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to look at and say, well, you know what, maybe I didn't really work hard as I thought I did to put myself in a position to be above all these other people. And maybe they're not lazy and all drug dealers like I think, in certain scenarios. But it might be something that was done wrong a long time ago that perpetuated oppression and inequality, and they're still struggling out of it.
It's a great point. I think, if you think back, if
Yeah.
we're talking history, the church played a part.
Absolutely.
The church
That's
played
huge.
a part.
That's
it's
huge.
huge.
Yeah,
Right?
that's big.
And so if we're going to fix it,
Yeah.
the best place to start
That's
it
huge.
is right here where we are.
Absolutely.
Right? As brothers and sisters, recognizing the fact that, okay, if the church played a part of it,
Yeah.
the church has to be a part of the solution because we have the only answer
Absolutely.
that is going to be able to fix this. Listen,
Yeah.
we're not talking about racism's not a skin problem. It's a sin problem. It's a sin issue.
Yeah.
And we know the only one
That's right.
Yeah.
that can help us with a sin problem is the one that died for all of us,
Absolutely. I
right?
believe that.
And so we got to recognize that and understand racism is a sin.
Yeah.
And so we're not fighting a battle against me, white, you, black.
Yeah.
It's not a flesh battle. It's a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
agree.
Yeah,
believe
and I
that.
think so. So tell me, talk a little bit. What's been your experience, you know, with racism?
You know, I was raised in a middle class neighborhood. My mom and dad were the ones who were able to provide that, but it was their generation that experienced the opposite end, which was extreme poverty. My father being brought up in Gowanus Projects, which was in Brooklyn, New York. My mother being brought up in Long Beach, California, where she had to eat sugar just to stay full. You know what I mean? And my dad having to put cardboard in his shoes, you know, to be able to walk, you know, to school every single day. And so when you ask, you know, a question like that about my experience, well, because of what they were able to endure, it shielded probably a lot from me, you know. So I was able to live in neighborhoods where there were white children, there were black children, you know. And for me at a young age, I really didn't see much that created any differences between us other than the fact that they had different skin than me, or maybe they had different hair texture than me. But as a child, you know, when you are a child, you think like a child. And so you think that in most ways, there's nothing about that that makes them odd. And as we become adults, we recognize that that's also true as well. However, you know, as I got older, and I started to kind of work my way into positions of, you know, to be able to advance and to move forward with my life as my mom and dad raised us to work hard, I recognized that there were things that were placed in my way to prevent me from being able to kind of move forward and to reach certain heights. And so although I might not have been able to see those things because they're very subversive and they're hidden, you know, we talk about institutional racism, it prevented me from being able to get certain job opportunities, you know. When you're at certain schools, whether it be high school, maybe at college, there might be perceptions about you. There might be conversations about you that are kind of keeping you in one place and not allowing you to be able to move or advance in the same speed as your white counterparts or any other major group.
Yeah.
So for me, I think the racism that I experienced was a lot of microaggressions. You know, having encounters with the police when I probably shouldn't have had those encounters. And maybe I wouldn't have had those encounters had I had a different skin complexion when I was running through the neighborhood. You know, so I can recall, you know, many times being pulled over by the police and being questioned, you know, in an aggressive way. But at that time, because I wasn't really mature and I didn't understand what was happening, I just thought it was a routine stop and probably a situation where I had done something that warranted them pulling me over. But as I got older and as I had more intense conversations with my dad and with my family, it was probably something a little bit beyond that that you weren't really aware of. So I think a lot of microaggressions have been my experience. I think also in certain places that I've tried to put myself in terms of competing or being able to go for job opportunities and things like that, I also would speak to those situations as also probably being, I would say, based on, you know, my color as opposed to my intellect and my ability and my character.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me.
Yeah, and I would say, through my experience, it was not as visible as obviously my parents or their parents. It was there, but as a child, you know, I think I was always taught, go play with your friends.
Yeah.
You know, I was always taught, go make amends with your friends, right? It was, you know, it was all about reconciliation. It was all about love. It was all about sharing and all of these things. So I think what that created for me was an image of, it doesn't matter the color of anyone's skin.
Yeah.
It's more about learning about that person's character.
Yeah.
And so I think in the environment in which I grew up in, you know, brothers and sisters, I didn't live with them all, but I lived in an environment where it was caring. It was about sharing.
Yeah.
It was about loving, right? We had our conversations, obviously. Yeah. And I think the closest I would say I've come to in terms of racism, experiencing it myself, I would say, is not even understanding that it was racism.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's huge. You know, if I could say it that way. And maybe some is naivety of myself, or whatever you want to call it, but it was going on and I just maybe was blind to it or didn't see it for what it was.
Yeah.
And so I think to some degree, I think it's actually helped me.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm the kind of guy, I'm going to try to not make it uncomfortable for me. I'm going to try to make it uncomfortable for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak to you whether you speak to me or not.
Exactly.
we in the elevator. I'm going to speak to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we don't look alike, but
Yeah.
I want you to know I'm in this elevator.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I've always tried to make it uncomfortable for them. I'm not going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to have those conversations and
Yeah.
be the initiator if I have to.
Yeah.
So,
It's good, man. I think, one of the conversations that you always hear, is when things like this happen
Yeah.
and issues arise like this is that you look and you hear stories like being pulled over,
Yeah.
because of the color of your skin, right?
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart,
Yeah.
to hear that and to know that there's a judgment based on the color of your skin. Like that breaks my heart,
Yeah.
right? And you think about that, and it just you begin to, and I think of myself, and I hear stories, and I think of myself, and well, man, I've never had to experience that.
Yeah.
That's got to stop. Like
Yeah.
that shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
But- And so I think, what do you think? Let's just from that aspect.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the perceptions, or maybe the biases, because I think,
Yeah.
and that we all have biases,
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
right?
absolutely.
Like, what are some of the biases that keep us from being able to engage
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
with each other?
Yeah, absolutely.
the world around us is greatly shaped by the television and by media.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the power to travel to East Los Angeles, or if you don't have the opportunity to go to New York City or a major urban area where black folks live and other people live from different ethnicities, then you are solely at the behest of the television and media, which can portray you to be something that you're not. And so I would definitely think that if we only allow ourselves to be educated by social media and by the opinions of one or two people who have an opportunity to have 30 minutes to an hour on television to talk about their personal perspectives and views on a community or a person, then you're already putting yourself in a position to fail,
That's good, man.
because you need to experience me.
Yeah.
Like, you need to come and sit with me the way we're doing right now and find that there is much more than me than the fact that I like a certain type of music,
Yeah.
or I like a certain type of food,
Yeah.
or I have this ability to play this sport.
Right.
Like, to recognize that my history and my personality and my character is just as complex as yours is. I mean, once you start to realize through breaking bread with somebody, but that they're the same as I am in almost every way, the only difference is their skin color, which actually makes us unique. It gives us diversity within our world. I don't want to look at just the same thing all the time. To see
Right,
someone
right.
different, that's a beautiful thing.
Right.
But for us to continue to feed our brains what we see either on our phones or through movies, that is only going to distort our ability to recognize reality.
Right.
If you watch videos of us always being in the hood selling drugs, then what are you naturally going to think as a child watching
Right.
a television without the
Right.
guidance of an adult? You're going to think that these people only do these things.
Yeah.
Come to find out that ultimately that was just a very small percentage of them
Absolutely.
that might have done that. And on top of that, there might be reasons for that activity perpetually taking place in that neighborhood because of their systemic racism and inequalities that have been purposely put in place to keep these people in this space where they only occupy poverty.
Yeah.
When you ask me the question of how does poverty create itself, it's by the very fact that you don't believe that I deserve the freedoms that you have because of the color of my skin. Poverty only exists in this world because people have put institutions in a position to be able to keep you down because you don't have the opportunity to contribute to the mentality of the way those people think and the opportunity to be able to make laws that speak to the empowerment of your community. You take away that and you will see poverty be wiped away because everyone was given an opportunity to start at the same place. And watch how we all flourish together, and you wouldn't be able to tell the differences between us. So stop watching television to form your opinion. Stop looking at the latest news outbreak of people doing this or doing that and forming your opinion based on that activity. Right. Come and sit with me and have a conversation.
Right. Now, I think that's the mistake, right? We listen to the media. We listen to the news because they want to divide.
Yeah.
Right? Their whole agenda is to keep the division going.
Absolutely.
It's
and not
entertaining.
bring us together.
Yeah.
Because it's entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes them money.
And let's face it, human beings are selfish.
Yeah.
We are selfish by nature. It takes a relationship for Christ for us to recognize that it's not about us.
Right.
And I don't need to hoard all of the knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't need to hoard all of the resources. I don't need to prevent you from having access to something because I'm afraid of you potentially getting into power and ultimately changing my life. I need to embrace the fact that you might help my kids out 5 years from now because maybe your brain was able to articulate something that I could not.
Right.
So the selfishness needs to be aborted out of every single person who does not think that someone deserves an opportunity because of the skin, the color of their skin.
That's good.
Yeah, and if I could just speak real quick on bias, one of the experiences I remember from my childhood, I was very active in sports, and I think that's when I began to learn about biases. Right, I could look at a particular kid or a peer of mine, and there's no way you can beat me at this game, and it was just simply by just looking at them, how they dribbled the ball, or they were too skinny, or whatever. Those biases that I had preconceived in my mind. But then you get on that court with that other athlete, and you find out they're just as talented as you. It's not because they went to school over here, or there's no way they didn't play on your playground. So there was all these kind of preconceptions. Like if you didn't play on my playground, you couldn't. There's no way you could play with us.
Yeah.
And so I think I took those biases and I became different when I got to other levels of sports.
Yeah.
I often made sure I got to know my counterparts. Right.
Yeah.
I'd hang out with them outside of just playing football. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not judging what I think of this particular athlete based on what I see.
Absolutely.
I want to be able to base it on something I know about that individual or that player. And so I think through sports, I think it really did help me and propelled me to not block myself in nor anyone else in, right? Just because the way they may or may not look like an athlete.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. And I need to speak about my bias. I mean, so I'm tall, kind of slim. People see me automatically, must be a basketball player. I can remember when I was in Greece and I think I got called Kobe 30 times. I'm like, bro, I wish I was that guy. But bias worked on my end to you as well.
Yeah.
Can I tell you that one of the best basketball players I've ever met in my life was a kid that I grew up with as a child. He was a white guy. One of the best basketball players, if not the best basketball player I've ever played.
Wow.
But you would see him and automatically think, man, he's a white guy. He doesn't know how to play basketball.
He don't know how to
Don't
dunk,
you know he was 10 times better than me when we were 9,
Wow.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And that would not seem as if it was something that was correct. Because what are we portrayed as these tremendous athletes? Although we might have that great skill, I do more than that. And there might be a situation where I'm not really good at that sport.
Yeah.
And so that bias that I'm guilty of and you may be guilty of and you may be guilty of is something that we also too have to kill in ourselves.
Absolutely.
So I have to intentionally walk into a relationship and say, you know what? Yo, Dre, do not think that this guy is smarter than you because he's white, he's got a tie on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or don't think that this guy is an athlete because he's black and his muscles are bulging.
Yeah,
Like he might
that's
be totally different or completely different from what you're already conceiving yourself to think.
Yeah,
But but yet again, the biases are formed by what I watched on television.
Sure.
And I had to educate myself through relationship to understand that we're far more than that.
Yeah.
Thank God for mom and dad who understood that. And so they were able to teach me that, but it still took experiences in real life to get me to understand these truths.
Amen. I think it's important, right, when we talk perception to keep in mind that contrary to what is the way to think in the world, so to speak, like not all white people are racist.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Not all black people are racist,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that inside the confines of that conversation, that we recognize and understand that we're not just basing off of a prejudice of what we've seen or witnessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't really know that, though, until we get in an inner circle.
Yeah.
Because if we're always on the outside looking in, or looking, it's easy to judge,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
It's easy to judge.
I mean, you might smell something good, it doesn't mean it tastes good.
Right.
I mean, I could smell something that's being prepared in the kitchen. It smells phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I go and taste it, and I'm like, this is the worst thing I've ever eaten in my life.
Yeah.
So the same thing has to be applied, like you said, to our perspectives. Like, I cannot believe, even though it's unfathomable for me to look at that video footage and not to become quickly angered.
Absolutely.
That every single police officer who's white is looking for an opportunity to put me in the same scenario.
Right.
I can't believe that. As much as my mind may want
Right.
to venture into that area, If I'm someone who knows the power of Christ, I recognize that everyone does not act that way.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, because of this heinous act,
perception.
you're going to have to deal with the fact that people are going to judge you based on what you just
Amen.
did.
Amen.
You know?
Yep.
But my mom and I mean, my uncle, you know, he was a police officer all of his life. And he was someone who I'd like to believe that was always trying to do the best while he was out there. So that perception of the police will change as we see these experiences or these encounters happen in this way. And our hope is
good.
that people will realize, no, he doesn't represent every cop. Furthermore, he doesn't represent every white person.
Right.
So that, I think, is so important for you to try to reset your brain every time you come encounter with somebody who you think fits a description.
Right.
To say, you know what, they might not fit the description.
That's right.
Let me have an open mind in this conversation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things, we need to wrap it up. I got one more thing that I want to ask, but I think that we just need to make sure that we recognize and understand that God made us unique.
Absolutely.
That, man, we all have a unique gift
Yeah.
and we all have a unique purpose. God made us
Yeah.
that way, right?
Yeah.
No matter what the color of our skin,
Yeah.
you know?
And I think that's the collective point. We don't want you, and nor should we, have to be made to feel as if somehow the fact that we are who we are, we need to be forgiven for that. Not at all.
Yeah.
We need to be embraced for the beauty that we bring into the world.
Yeah.
And in that process, we can rid ourselves from believing that someone doesn't deserve or doesn't belong.
Right.
But there's no apology that you need to give for being white. That's ridiculous. There's no apology that I need to give for being black.
Right.
But what there is a ferociousness inside of you and in me to stand against that.
Absolutely.
Because we stand with Christ. And if we
Absolutely.
stand with Christ, then he compels us to fight against issues like this because he was for that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, as we wrap it up, what can we do? What can be done to begin to make a change?
I think the change from my perspective has got to begin with me. I've got to change who I am. I've got to change who I represent. I've got to change who I impact, how I impact them. I've got to change. I've got to be the change, if you would, that I want to see in others. And so I start that conversation, for example, with my children. When I see them do things that I know aren't right or that I don't think would represent me well as a parent. And oftentimes they'll come, well, Dad, you know, you did it. And so they're like my most honest people because they do. They tell me when I'm setting the bad example, right? So that change begins in me. They need to see me engage with all people.
Yeah.
They need to see me engage, you know, with not just people of my background and my
Yeah.
color. They need to see that. They
That's
need
good.
to see me embrace them. And I think that's a great opportunity. That's one of the things I do love here at Move Church is we get that opportunity every Sunday, every day, every event that we have. I'm embracing someone with a different background, different culture, different upbringing, different status in life. And that, to me, is where the change begins because it begins in me. I now see people through a different lens.
Yeah.
I see them as people.
Yeah.
I see them as God's creation. I
Yeah.
see them as, you know, he died for them just as like he died for me. And so when that change affects me inside, I think it then emanates. It then begins to reflect. I can become a reflection of the change that occurred in me
Yeah.
and try to share that with others, that same type of transformation and change can happen in
Yeah.
them.
That's good, man. That's
I
good.
just think there's two things. I think, and they're mutually exclusive in two separate areas. The first is love, and the second is integrity. I think right now, or we need to experience, the birth of people specifically of color in positions of power to be able to help create legislation that speaks to those communities and includes every other person in that process. Because when you extend the table and you allow me to have a seat in a place where you dwell and you make decisions and you pass down policies and you pass down laws, now you have an opportunity to understand the plight that I've experienced for so long. And when you do that, we can actually put together things that will reform a community, that will change departments, that will change individuals who lead those departments so that they can be individuals who have the right character to be able to make the right choices. So I really believe that people need to be put in a position to be able to govern their communities, to be able to contribute to their communities, to be able to empower their communities. And I think the second thing is that someone who's white, because they might say, you know what, there's nothing I can really do about this issue because it's not affecting me, or, you know, I'm not the one who's being persecuted. I would say that they're wrong. what they can do is come alongside someone specifically who is different from them, and particularly someone who's black in this scenario, and say, you know what, I'm going to stand up against racism just as much as if this issue were going to attack my children. Because as I spoke to earlier, when something is coming after your children, you're going to want to defend them and you're going to want to fight for them. So I think if a person who is not black stands up and picks up this issue and fights with that much intensity, then I truly believe that it's possible for us to overcome something that has plagued us for so long. So when you put those two things together, love and integrity, and you implement them into the way that we legislate our communities, the way that we empower a specific community, and then you put a person who's not me, who's someone different like yourself, alongside me and says, you know what, Andre, I'm going to pick up this issue and fight it with you until I don't see it anymore. Amen. And that takes integrity. And it's a difficult space to occupy because you're going to be uncomfortable. Right. But it's going to take that type of uncomfort to be able to move us into a place where we're now experiencing true change. Amen. Because talk is the first step and the action will be the second one. Amen. So those are my suggestions, absolutely.
That's good. One of the things that I love about Move Church is the fact of the diversity that we have here. Yeah. That we worship together, and what I'm praying that will happen, that like this, what we're doing today, church, is like, this is not the end, this is just the beginning. And what I'm hoping that will happen is this conversation that we're having today has started here, but I pray that it will go out into the homes and that we can begin to see the change, and we can begin to let this just be the beginning of the conversation, so that we can become the salt and the light that God is wanting us to be for Woodbridge and Northern Virginia, that we can begin to see change happen first within us, because it's got to start here. You know what I mean? Amen. Like, I can't expect somebody else to do it if I'm not willing to engage in the conversation. You know what I mean? So it's got to start here. It's got to start internally here at Move Church. But man, I just pray. I grew up in Mississippi, and growing up in the South, you had black churches, you had white churches. We didn't worship together, and so just to have the opportunity that we have, I think is so special, man. Yeah. And whether it's blacks, whites, Hispanics, like we're multicultural, and I think it's beautiful. It's just a representation of what heaven's going to look like, and so I just pray that church, that we just engage in this conversation, that we stand for what is right and stand for the righteousness. There is no place for racism. There is no place for racial injustice, and we got to take a stand for it. And Andre, I'd like for you to close us out in prayer.
Absolutely.
if you would. Andre.
Father God, we believe in your awesome saving power.
Yeah.
We believe that you are in control.
Yes.
Lord, we trust you to be able to lead us into a place where we can grow closer to you.
Yes.
And as a result of growing closer to you, we begin to realize and to put into action the love that you have for us. You loved us so much that you sent your son Jesus to die on the cross for our sins, Lord. Lord, I pray that we begin to have that same love for our brothers and our sisters.
That's right. Yes,
who are different colors than us.
Yes, Jesus.
Who look differently than us. Who sound differently than us, Lord. I pray for an overwhelming amount of love to immediately implement itself within our communities, within our cities, within our country, and throughout our world.
Hallelujah.
I pray for you above all else to be just exalted and to be lifted up into the position that you deserve.
Yes.
Because when that happens, Lord, real change begins to take place.
Yes,
that
Jesus.
only you're able to create, to change a man or a woman's heart, and to change a man or a woman's mind is the work that only you can do. And so, Lord, we believe that through tonight's conversation, that this will be an opportunity to give others a level of comfort as they pursue the same thing. Father, I thank you for allowing us to meet together as brothers, to be able to have this discussion. We pray that your spirit was here and that it will continue to manifest itself, not only within this conversation and in this congregation and in this church, but throughout this area and throughout this world, as we, Lord, look to you for guidance on how we should address these issues.
Yes,
and in your precious in holy name, we all said amen.
Amen. Amen. Brother, thank you so much. Love you so much, both of you. Church, God bless you. We're so honored that you joined us today. I pray that this was beneficial and that God will use it for His glory. Amen. To begin to see change in our community and in our nation, in our country. God bless you. We love you so much. Have a great week, and we will see you next week online. God bless.